council chambers here. Our work sessions are a little more informal. We do not take any formal action at our work sessions. The purpose is discussion, with the possible exception of giving direction to staff to bring back something in the future. So with that, I am going to ask for an addition of an item to our agenda before I turn it over to Kevin Iflin. Chris is out of town. We had a request to add DEQ discussion on the tetrachloroethylene PCE spill site, sort of a status report. But in order to do that, we need a affirmative vote of the council to do it. And so if I will make that motion, we expect it to take about 15 to 20 minutes is the estimate. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Chiriky. Discussion on the motion. We'll have a little bit of an update on the purpose of that from Debbie in a minute. The motion is to add it at the beginning of the agenda. That way our representatives from DEQ can move on with their day. Any discussion on the motion, Council Member Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. I just find I will not support it, only not because I don't want to hear from DEQ and they're here and that, but I think that issues like this are really important to the community, especially those people in that area should have been given more public notice to actually participate in the public discussion on this thing, because I don't know if this is coming back for a future discussion. If it is, then maybe we'll go ahead and get that, posted in the future and we can actually bring it back. But I think it's important we try to follow the rules and public media notices to provide that information, especially something like this that can impact a lot of lives. So, I'm going to vote no to that only because I think we need to be a little more clear on bringing these matters sooner, and but not that I don't want to hear this issue. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I'll just note, because I had a similar question in my own mind, and appreciate it. Billings, Montana Codes 2-226 provides that, quote, work sessions shall be informal meetings conducted by the mayor who may alter the agenda during the meeting based on the consensus of those present. So I think we have the legal authority to do it. Doesn't mean that it's not good practice to give as much practice or as much notice as possible. Victoria Hill, our PIO, did send out a notice to media, I believe on Friday, to get the word out as much as possible. So that was not a lot of notice. I would certainly acknowledge that, but it was at least something. Councilmember Purington?
Well, the only thing I was going to say in addition to what you just read, I don't have section or verse, but I also thought as long as you had 48 hours notice on a change or public notification, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, there's a Attorney General decision out there, and Karen, correct me if I get this wrong, that uses that number as reasonable notice. It's not set in the statute, and I think that assumes that you're taking action. Tonight, I don't think we should take action. It's just to hear the matter. Further discussion on the motion, Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Our presenters tonight were also available and made a presentation at the Central Terry Park Task Force on Thursday. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any further discussion on the motion? If not, if in favor of the motion to make that agenda a new item number 1 to our agenda, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Councilmember Neese voting in opposition, everyone else voting in favor, motion passes. With that change to the agenda, though, I'll kick it back to our Assistant City Administrator, whatever your name is, Kevin Iflin.
What does the nameplate say?
It says Chris Kukulski, but you don't look like Chris, so.
Well, thank you for that. I'll take it as a compliment. As you alluded to, Chris is out of town this week, so I am filling in for him in this capacity. And then we'll just get it teed off right away. Deb Mailing, our Public Works Director, has got just an introduction to do, and then we'll get off and running on the first topic.
Thank you very much. Then we will do that. Go ahead. Well, Debbie, you can give a little tee it up.
Thank you. So Mayor and Council, most of you know that the Superfund site, well, that PCE site was listed on the Superfund National Priorities List in September of '21. For those of you that are new, if you weren't, and I think most of you still, even though you were new, were here at the time. So, but if you want to talk in more detail about some of the history, I'm happy to do that at some point, but a lot of you have lived through it, so I wasn't going to go into that. We have been updating in the weekly report when something happens. We haven't had a lot happening too much lately, but we've been updating in the weekly. I think our last one was in December. We will continue to talk with the representatives from EPA and DEQ and try to do more often, more frequent updates in that weekly. So look in those weeklies and we'll try to just keep you posted on what's going on. So we have two people here today, Bridget Williams from the EPA and Jason Rappy from DEQ are here. And I just put the map on here so that when they're talking, you can kind of get an area in your mind. So I think Bridget's going to do most of the talking.
Bridget, welcome.
Jason can talk too.
I can at least stand here and look good.
So thank you for the invitation, the impromptu invitation, if you will, to come and speak with you. We are starting our investigation of the PCE site. We will be here for quite some time. So this week last week we kicked off what we call our vapor intrusion sampling for structures that are on the site. The site is actually 850 acres, so it's quite large. You can see it's starting in the southwest, and then the water and the flow is going to the northeast. So that's the direction the plume is moving. There's actually 2,700 structures on top of the groundwater plume. And we believe there's about 5 point sources. So the biggest one is at Big Sky Linden. It's kind of where it narrows in the middle there. And then there are a few other sources inside the plume area. So what we're doing now is taking samples. So in November, we did some groundwater sampling. We'll be following that up with another groundwater sampling event in late April and going into May. And then right now we're doing indoor air sampling. So it's what we're looking for is vapor intrusion into buildings. So what that means is the structures that are on top of the groundwater plume, the chlorinated solvents that are in the plume can actually percolate up, and just like radon, they can build up underneath buildings and foundations. And then if there are cracks or other mechanisms, pipes, other openings in foundations, those gases can go into a home or a business. And so what we're doing is what we call multiple lines of evidence approach here, where putting passive samplers in-house, but we're also doing drilling into foundations, into the subslab, and we will be taking samples from under houses too, where appropriate. We're also drilling holes outside of structures. The soil gas samples, I know, I'm a chemist, so this is a little bit outside my wheelhouse. But we'll be drilling samples down, and just like and we'll show you the devices here that we'll be using. But we'll put a little passive sampler in the soil outside of structures to get a sense of the soil vapor concentration. And then we'll also be sampling ambient air outside the community because we need a baseline. So we need to know what normal air, and that's a little bit tricky because we have roads and, depending on the time of day, the ambient air can change. But we will be trying to get a baseline for what indoor air could look like. Also, it's important to note that cleaning products. So cleaning products and other chemicals that are commonly used in homes can impact the results. So this sampling that we're doing is fairly in-depth. We're really working with homeowners to inventory the chemicals in their home and remove them so that we don't get any false positives, to try to make the data as robust and sound as possible. Let's see, with that, I guess we can show you some of what we're putting out and what we're doing here. But I guess I gave you a lot of information, so I'm just going to pause and answer questions before we go there.
I think we're all wondering what in the world Yellow Jackets have to do with chlorinated solvents.
Do you want to go ahead, Jason?
Sure. So really, we have two different sampling methods. We have a passive sampler, which is this tiny little vial looking thing.
Pass it around, too.
And we can absolutely pass it around. And we have an active sampler. And they each have their own, pros and cons. But for the passive sampler, especially if we're putting it outside, we needed something to kind of protect it from the elements. So we were going to put it in a wasp trap. And the thing about a wasp trap is nobody's really going to mess with a wasp trap.
At least that's our hope.
There's a couple locations that we were hoping to place some of these passive samplers on city property, and we still haven't gone through the proper channels, but we're looking at 5 parks in the cemetery of possibly hanging a wasp trap for about 28 days. And so the wasp trap's pretty just to protect the sampler. Another thing we're gonna have are these active samplers, these sumicans. What they are is basically, this vessel's under vacuum. It's gonna be set outside similar to the wasp trap here. We're probably gonna hang it from a tree, we're gonna hang it from a tripod or something like that. But it's gonna draw in air over a span of about 24 hours. And we'll go and collect that.
So I want to make an important point here. This is a little bit alarming to look at. So before we place this, we need to coordinate very closely with you and with the police department and others that might get 911 calls to make sure that we're all on the same page and we have a protocol for addressing these, and that the way they look, maybe signage or something. This is a much faster sample than the wasp trap. The wasp trap will be out for 28 days. This is much faster, but it will still be in the community. So, yeah. And then, those are it. We'll also be using these in homes as well. So I mentioned that we are drilling the in people's foundations. So this can also be used to take samples from underneath people's homes. So a little bit not as, the homeowners will be aware in that case.
Very good. We'll have some questions. Councilmember Gulick.
Thank you. Is there, for homeowners that have crawl spaces, I guess this would be also a concern, or businesses such as ours? And I guess, how do we make arrangements for testing, I guess, of the ambient air or the vapor intrusion, excuse me?
Yes, so talk to me. Roger Huger-Heidi, he's the EPA's remedial project manager for the site. I'm his backup, but I'm also an EPA RPM. And both Roger and I are scheduling those. So all we need to start is an access agreement before we can set foot on anyone's property. And I have a whole bunch here. I thought there might be interest, so I can hand those out to folks. And then once we have access, we can work with you at a convenient time to schedule. Like I said, it can be a little bit intense because we are doing that chemical inventory.
Great, thank you, Bridget. If you'd leave a couple of those with Kevin, maybe a couple with Debbie, then we can always make copies and get them out. Thank you very much. Councilmember Boyette?
Thank you, Mayor. Once you have all the data, are you trying to prove a hypothesis, or you're trying to verify what you already know, or what's the reason? Give us.
Absolutely. Great question, council member. So what we are trying to figure out is exactly the extent of the situation. So we know that the groundwater plume is roughly there. So our groundwater sampling will be used to delineate the plume more. So we'll have a better handle on exactly where it's at. With a plume this size, a lot of sampling is required to get that. information. And then with the vapor intrusion, this is fairly new to EPA. We just incorporated vapor intrusion into our hazard assessment for Superfund, I believe in 2017. So the site, we don't have any vapor intrusion data. So right now we're just trying to get a handle on if it's an issue, where it's an issue, and then go from there. I did not mention this, but if there is vapor intrusion in a building, then the mitigation is very similar to radon. So essentially, we would be installing a radon mitigation system.
Councilmember Denise.
Thank you, Mayor. So I think you said there's 2,700 properties?
Correct.
So will you be testing all of those properties or just a sample? If your neighbor has it, you won't get it, things like that?
Well, and it can depend. So in the same neighborhood, a lot depends on the type of building, when it was built, how sound the foundation is, but then it can change over time. So this is something that will be ongoing. Right now in this sampling session, we're testing 50 structures, and then we'll be back this summer to test 150 or more. We may do more. We're getting a lot of interest, so we're looking at that right now.
Okay,
Yeah.
Mayor, a quick follow-up on that?
Go ahead.
All right, so so it's only 100 now, so if you want your property tested, you better contact you first now before they go up. I'm assuming you're going to make sure you're kind of testing within a certain area, or are you testing the perimeter? Is that what you're looking at? or-
We're testing, so as I mentioned, the one of the big hotspots was Big Sky Linen.
Okay.
So if, I wish I could point, but if you're going from Big Sky Linen out, so that immediate neighborhood is one of our primary focuses.
Okay, so you're kind of starting at the beginning of where it goes out.
Right,
Go from
but
there.
anyone who reaches out to us, we will get them on the list because we understand that peace of mind is very important.
Okay, thank you.
Bridget, when the city was asked to apply for Superfund listing, one of the representations was that would trigger federal dollars from EPA. That's what's paying for this. That's what's paying for you. Do you anticipate more direct costs for the city itself? And if so, to what extent would those be reimbursable from EPA or other federal sources?
That's an excellent question, and I am not the person to answer that one. But I am writing other direct costs for city, and I can follow up and get you that answer.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any other questions for Bridget or for Jason? Councilmember Gulick.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to follow up then, I guess, following up on the mayor's question, in terms of for property owners, are there any funds that might be available to them if they need to install a radon mitigation system or something of that nature?
So we would do that. So this is part of the Superfund site. So they did not cause this problem. So because this is a Superfund site, that would fall under EPA.
Bridget, on that, at the Bozeman Sullivan site, DQ installed or EPA vapor extraction towers. Is that the likely remediation methodology here, and is that something you anticipate to happen?
Oh, for the site as a long-term?
Yeah.
Unclear. There's multiple things you can do. Our removal went in several years prior, 2008, is that right? And we tried to remove quite a bit of the source at Big Sky Linen. So we could try removal again. Another option, there's been some good success with microbial remediation, but that's to be determined based on the data we collect. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't see any other questions, so thank you, too, for being here. This is an opportunity for public comment after each one of these items, so we'll open it up for public comment. If anybody is here with us today who would like to comment, please come to the podium, and we'll just ask you to keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Is there anybody who'd like to comment on this item? And I assume we have nobody online. Kevin's indicating no, so seeing no public comment, we'll close public comment on item number 1. Thanks again. And we'll move to what's the former item 1, now item number 2, the work order 2207 Maloney Lane 30% design update. Debbie Melling, our Public Works Director, is our presenter this evening. Debbie.
All right, it's not often I'm taller than somebody up here, so I'm kind of, I do have 4-inch heels, so I probably shouldn't be too proud of myself, but anyway, so yes, as a lot of you know, at 30% design, we come to the city council and talk about what our design criteria is, what some of our assumptions are going in, and what we anticipate the construction is going to look like. When the Complete Streets policy was passed in 2011, this was one of the requirements that we come at this point and talk about it so that everybody knows going in kind of what it's going to look like. So tonight, like I said, we are at 30%. I don't have all the answers. This is, at 30%, it's basically a conceptual design. So we know what it's generally going to look like, but I don't have like every sign location. We don't know exactly where the bus pullouts are going to be, that sort of thing. So we know there's going to be them, but not where they are. So that's kind of the status of where we are with this. Is this gonna, or is not? Yeah, it did. So again, this is the project location we're looking at. So it's Midland, or Maloney from Midland, where we stopped the Midland project. Most of you remember a few years ago, we built Midland from South Billings Boulevard over to Maloney. This will take it from that intersection of Maloney and Midland down to Elysian. So you can see there the project limits. So the general project will be, the whole project will be constructed in one phase. Sometimes we phase them over a couple of years. You'll see when I get to the construction sequencing, we may do utilities in 1 year and then surfacing in the next year, but it's still one project. So the consultant team is HDR, and they are completing the full design. And it does include a traffic study at Maloney and Elysian. Midland and Maloney had a traffic study done when we did the Midland project, so that's why that's not included in this one. So when we start a project, and this shows an arterial street section, which Maloney's a strange, it's a collector, but it functions a lot like an arterial, so we're still trying to figure out what the correct classification is. But when we looked at it as an arterial, just to make sure we're accommodating all the users. So when we look at these, we start with the facts of the road, and then we decide how many travel lanes, what do we do about safety? Are we gonna have streetlights, two-way left turn lanes, pedestrian access, all that sort of thing. Look at the multimodal users, whether we're gonna put parking on it or not, and then what to do with intersections. So this is just something that, this is the blank canvas we start with, is this section here. This project has about 77 to 90 feet of right-of-way, and we need around 80 for what we want to build. So that's good. We're in good shape on this one. So this particular project, we do end up with one travel lane in each direction. You can see there the vehicle per day count is right under 10,000. We expect that to go up to somewhere around 14 to 15,000. That will get accommodated with 2 travel lanes. We also added the two-way left turn lane. Obviously, when you have a lot of turning movements, not restricted access, it makes sense to put a two-way left turn lane in, and that's the case on this road. Streetlights throughout. Obviously, when we do streetlights, the project itself pays for the streetlights, but the ongoing maintenance and operations cost will be brought to you through an SLIMD for adjacent property owners to fund that. So that we say streetlights throughout, but that will obviously be an action on your part. To accommodate our multimodal users, we are putting a sidewalk on the one side, a trail on the other side. And I can't read that. Oh, can you make that larger? Anyway, so the trail itself, we do have a little bit of right-of-way that's skinnied up. So while we keep 10 feet most of the way, we do have an 8-foot trail for a small section of it. And then with that boulevard, we vary that, of course, depending on what we have in those locations. Okay, so we are not doing on-street bike lanes, obviously, with the adjacent multimodal path. We're hoping to accommodate the users in that way. Bus paths will be used. I don't know where they're going to be yet. We're working with Met to figure out where the best location for those will be. And accessibility compliant throughout. So of course that just means your truncated domes and your ramps and everything. So parking, we just have one small location of parking that you'll see on a section map that I'm going to show you later. And then we have the two intersections. So Midland and Maloney has an intersection that is state-owned, so we don't have a lot of ability to do anything else on that. We've kind of done everything we can on our corners, and the rest is state jurisdiction. And then the four-way stop existing at Maloney and Elysian will be a traffic signal, and you'll see a little bit later where we get to that. All right, now I think it's, there we go. So this is a typical section for this. So you'll see two driving lanes, two-way left turn lane, the multi-use path, and the sidewalk. So this is just a picture of basically what I just described a minute ago. And yeah, we have it looking north and looking south, so. You can go ahead.
Councilor Gillick?
Excuse me, yes, thank you, Mayor. Debbie, so there's part of it that's 90 feet wide, though, in terms of the right-of-way. I mean, is there, having parking, I realize that right now, at least, I don't know, many of the businesses, with the exception of one place where there is parking, are really set up for on-street parking, but, there's a lot of evidence that helps keep traffic slower and just reduces the loading in terms of off-street parking requirements. With that 90-foot wide right-of-way, are there areas where there can be parking, at least on one side?
So I will show where the parking's gonna go. The challenge with putting parking other places when it's not gonna be used is that then it just creates a really wide corridor and actually increases speeding.
Yeah.
So for a lot of this corridor, you don't have areas that would use parking. They're just so far away. If you think about the corridor, like on the east side, everything backs up or sides to it, and there's a fence and a pretty wide boulevard. So I think if we were to add parking in some of those locations, we would actually run the risk of increasing speed. So it's definitely a balance, but I'll show you where the parking will be located.
Councilmember, is it okay if we pepper you with
that's
questions
fine.
midstream here?
Sure.
Okay, Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. When I was on the zoning commission, there used to be lots of people that would come to the meetings and say, don't put any more houses down there. Leave us alone. We have too much traffic, because it was a two-lane road.
Right.
It's still a two-lane road. So how are you going to get all these more people out on the same two-lane road? They thought it may be a four-lane or a three-lane. I mean, just a comment.
Sure. So what we look at are traffic counts. A two-lane road without a two-way left turn lane is different than a two-lane road with that left turn lane. We have a lot less conflict, a lot less, people turning on and off. They can use that middle lane for any of those movements. So you move a lot of traffic with that three-lane. The other thing is on a road, we have a lot of two-lane roads that carry 20,000 plus vehicles. And really where you end up with problems is at your intersections. So as long as you have good access to your turning movements and you have good intersections, it'll carry a lot of traffic, more than we expect on this road. Sure. I don't think it's moving. It wouldn't be a night if we didn't have a little technical difficulty, would it? So I'm going to go through each section of this very quickly. This is on the north end, right at the intersection of Maloney and Midland, with the Holiday gas station there on the left-hand side. And then the right-hand side being the hotel and convention center. So again, 3 lanes existing, but this is where I talked about those intersections where you really start getting efficiencies. So by adding the additional lanes and getting more traffic through, you shorten the queues and can increase your ability to carry more traffic. So that's why we have those 3 lanes on the south northbound lane. And again, the multi-use trail you can see on here. This is the only area that we have curb multi-use trail, and it's because of the width at that intersection. We just don't have enough right-of-way to push that back and have a boulevard. So this is up against the curb.
Mayor. Councilor Bernice?
Thank you. Debbie, on that last section, if you wouldn't mind, we heard an issue regarding the old gas station there, and I think it's labeled wild tornadoes. There was concern over what that road would do. Do you know how it's impacting that now?
So there is space to put.
Yes. I was told before I should lean into my mic. apologize for that. So there was we had a decision not too long ago about the property there, and we weren't sure how this road would impact that. Would you mind indicating how that impacts that now?
Sure. So you can see on this drawing that basically this is where you have the curb. So there's just no, with the width and the amount of right-of-way here, there's no ability to move that back to Boulevard. A lot of the conversation that night was centered around, could you put some trees and a boulevard out by the curb and that sort of thing. As you can see here, we just don't have the space. So it would be curb line, adjacent pedestrian facilities, and then right into the gas station.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so the middle section, of course, is the middle. So north of Elysian, south of Midland, very standard two-way left turn lane. You've got the trail on the one side that is a boulevard. We've got enough room in there to run a boulevard. And then we've got the sidewalk on the other side. And the south section, this is where the parking comes in. And again, if you've been down there, it's a little commercial strip there, and they don't have a lot of other parking. So providing this parking not only provides parking, but it does also do what Councilmember Gulick said, and that is to make that feel more constrained so that it does allow people to kind of slow down a little bit. So again, we'll look at this intersection in particular, but this is the short section of parking that I was talking about earlier. And there's a better picture of it. It's very needed when you go down there. People are parking there almost all the time. So we really didn't want to take that away. So this is really hard to see, but basically what I wanted to show is just that we did a study of this intersection. A roundabout has a great level of service, but it's very expensive. It impacts the right-of-way, the adjacent property owner a lot. Roundabouts are really hard to fit into existing locations. The other thing is, because it's a single lane roundabout, it doesn't require pedestrian facilities. So, or it requires crossings, just not flashing beacons or any of the enhanced crossings. So looking at the free right there in the middle intersection option gives us the best level of service, what we think is the best option for pedestrians, and at a cost that's much less than the roundabout. Due to a question that, and it didn't show up. So, it didn't show up. So, Councilmember Neist asked a question, and I redid this slide, and it's not showing up. I'm not really sure why. But the pedestrian crossings are at each corner. On the free right, we do look at pedestrian crossings that are consistent. So the clock starts over basically at that refuge island. So that's why we say that this is, in our opinions, a safer pedestrian, because you have signals on all the legs, and then that free right, you have a refuge island, so you're only crossing one lane. In addition, if you look at that corner, there are no pedestrian facilities on the northwest corner of this. So most of the pedestrian access, we believe, is going to come on the south side and then on the west side. So that's why we picked the intersection that we selected on this one. Oh.
Councilmember Gulick?
Debbie, so for that free right turn then, is there going to be some sort of like, our motorists are often not looking for, what's that?
I think they're calling it a hawk, no.
Oh, yeah, that,
You did that, some kind of
Right,
light.
the flashing beacon.
yeah,
Right.
just, so there'll be a flashing beacon
It
there? or-
won't.
Okay.
On that corner, it'll just be a crosswalk, like again with the refuge island in a single lane. People will be southbound at that point, so the pedestrians will be in front of them. You know, a lot of the issues that we see with conflict pedestrians, like at roundabout, where people are looking to the left and the pedestrians are to the right. Again, at signals, a lot of times you'll be making a right turn, so on a right on red, and you don't see that person. In this case, that movement is actually southbound, and that's where the pedestrians will be. So they'll be visible in this case. If we see issues, again, we don't think that corner is going to be very used because there's no facilities there. But if we see issues, it could be an area that we look at a flashing beacon at some point.
Okay. Another question, Councilmember Gulick?
Second question. It looked like in the middle section, there was a holiday, but opposite, it seems like there should be interstate, there should be a street called Interstate.
Very nice.
And I didn't see that in there. I mean, I don't think it's really too consequential, but I think there's a street that's missing in the middle It's a four-way intersection, it looks like.
There is not another stop on this. There is a road that comes in just north of this development, and it's a two-way stop control. So the side streets have the stop, but there isn't a stop sign for north and southbound.
I'm sorry, yeah,
remember. I haven't-
not four-way stop, right, but there's
Right,
there's
the
another
two-way stop
intersection,
control.
there's an intersection
Yep.
there that for interstate, at least, is the name of the street,
Right.
that I didn't see in the middle one, but.
Right, so it won't be a controlled intersection. It won't have a signal or a roundabout or anything. It'll just have the stop control. And I probably just didn't show it because I was showing a typical section. So I probably my slide probably didn't overlap.
Go ahead. Councilmember Boyette?
Thank you, Mayor. I realize you did Songbird, looks really nice. Are you going to do any education for the public so that, hey, people, start using this instead of once this gets tore up?
Yes, thank you for asking that. So during construction, we probably will close this. There's some deep utilities in there that we need to get into, and it's pretty narrow. So during construction, the reason we got Songbird the year ahead was that we want people to access Songbird, and then to the west, they'll access Elysian out to the frontage road. So we will have detours set up. We've been trying not to tell anybody yet because the road's not done. So we've been trying to keep people kind of off that. But yes, Songbird will be open as soon as we get out there and finish the rest of that road. We have another lift to go on that road, so then we'll have it open. Good. So there is my slide that has the access there. So just kind of shows where we think the pedestrians will be. So I'm not going to go through this in detail, but in the Complete Streets policy, it has a checklist that we need to go through and ensure that we've basically looked at all the multimodal users and that we've accommodated those. So you can see on here, we've accommodated every user on this street. So let's see if there's anything here, but really there's nothing else beyond that. It makes sure that we're addressing everything. So we do look at, under the project scope, how much that multimodal cost is in concert with the rest of the project. The project's about 4.2 million, and you can see multimodal's around 300,000. So it's a pretty low cost for the multimodal users on this project. And we'll be maintaining the street. So the other thing that Councilmember Repsis pointed out not too long ago is that section 22202 of the city code requires us to actually write a report for arterial and collector streets. Typically what we do is we come and we talk about these things. We don't necessarily put it in a report. So I was just gonna key in on some of the things that were in that section. Basically it asks, what are you gonna impact? And for anybody that's driven down there, this road isn't really gonna change the corridor as it stands. It'll create better facilities for multimodal and for traffic, but it doesn't really change they've got a word in here, physiography, which is the physical environment there, really doesn't change what it looks like. It's an urban route now, it's gonna be urban when it's done. So we can go through there if you want, but it basically just has us kind of check off what the impacts of this project are. And we did not think there was adverse effects. The level of service doesn't decrease, and the only real impacts are the short-term impacts of construction. Long-term impacts will be improved everything. So, couple things. These are just random throughout the project. We're going to utilize as much of the existing sidewalk, curb, and gutter as we can. There are some sections in here, so we're going to try to do that. We talked about the right-of-way on the north end where we can't put those boulevards in. And on the west side, we've got some county subdivisions. So those are not included in the SLIMD. Those will be included if they come in at some point into the city. So Ed Songbird was completed. So what you will see moving forward are property owner assessments. As most of you know, whenever we build a road like this, the property owners adjacent to the property pay for curb, gutter, sidewalk, or their portion of the trail that's equivalent to sidewalk. And then you'll see an SLIMD, which is the operations and maintenance for those streetlights. And then the bid award will come this fall, probably do utilities over the winter, and then get in and really get the road constructed next spring, summer. And that is all I had.
Okay, Councilmember Puritan?
Thank you, Debbie. So my question revolves around the property owner assessment.
Okay.
This project probably would not have been done other than the new subdivision that's gone out there, McCall subdivision, and then the ones that are moving on the west side, also off of Elysian. So that's where the impact of traffic will come, I suppose. So with that property owner assessment, who actually is going to be assessed for that? If it's just the ones that are right there that are next to the street, but it's all those other people too. So I'm not sure if you could explain how you divvy that up.
Sure. So both the state law and the city code are pretty clear that adjacent property owners are responsible for a road, a curb and gutter, and a sidewalk in front of their properties. And that's whether you're on a residential street, on a commercial street, arterial collector, it doesn't matter. You're responsible for those things. So when we have a project like this come through, we assess exactly what we would assess if it was on a local street. So it's just those improvements that you, per state law, have to have in front of your property. These particular ones, when they developed, because we didn't really know where the road was going to go, the SIAs say at some point, you're going to have to pay for this. And so we put those in a lot of the agreements that were along there, depending on time. Anywhere that we could build the improvements at the time, we did. And that's where we're trying to save a lot of those improvements where we can.
Go ahead.
So what, the naming of it, whether it's an arterial or a collector, how is that going to impact that?
It really doesn't. The only reason it would impact it is if we want to use arterial funds on it, we would want it to be an arterial versus a collector. That would be one reason we would change it. But really, we have a functional classification map in this city, and it basically says, these are the roads that you use, when you're commuting. These are the roads you use when you want to get out of your neighborhood, and these are the roads you use to get to your home. So we just want to make sure that our streets really line up on that functional class. It doesn't really matter for the most part. If we wanted to use urban funds on this someday, we would have to have it be an urban route. But given we're going to build it, we probably won't need urban funds for many years on it. So that's really.
Councilmember Denise?
Thank you, Mayor. Hey, Debbie, you indicated you got to get some right-of-way on this middle option. Any indication that will be slowed down or slow this project down at all?
No, not to date. It's only about 3 feet.
Okay.
And to date, we have not heard that it's going to be a problem. It's been a good conversation.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Councilmember Rupsis?
Debbie, I just wanted to follow up on Pam's question about the assessments. Every time we do a zone change, there's always this conversation of if there are any impacts to traffic or infrastructure in the area, those subdivisions will be required to fund those. And I think the question about the assessment was a little different than that. We have 3 large subdivisions out there that are obviously contributing to that. Have they had to set aside funds for these improvements?
They have, and I'm sorry I didn't hit on that piece when you asked that. So yes, when developments come in, we look at their impact to adjacent streets, usually intersections. So I'd have to go back and look, but they would have been required to do intersection dedication or a cash contribution. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Debbie, I'll put a question to you that's kind of triggered by the last question. When we get zone changes, adjacent property owners often object, saying there's going to be too much traffic. And we're left trying to judge what is too much traffic. Those zone change applications generally do not go through your office, is my understanding, for you to make any judgment based on that. So this is somewhat generic, but since we're looking at road design, when do we know we have too much traffic? And would it be possible to create some fairly objective standards that you engineer types like, that we can apply in those situations and tell our community and put them on notice that if you are near a street that is at X level of service or X number of trips, that you should either expect more, it's just going to get more traffic, or you're kind of at capacity and that's a realistic concern. So could you just comment on that issue generally?
Sure, there's a couple of ways I would answer that. Number one is that with all infrastructure or most infrastructure, we create models. So our water system, our sewer system, our road system, we have these models that tell us when we hit capacity for different roads, different intersections, that kind of thing. So we have a background that tells us this is where we are. It's gonna make it explode or it's not. So we can look at that sort of thing. I would say that is a big part of what we look at when we do our capital plan. We don't want to stop development in an area because we're not keeping up on the roads. Do we need to add a lane? Do we need to add an intersection improvement or something? Those are the kinds of things that we look at when we do the CIP to say, this one's getting near capacity. We need to put some lanes in here. So that's where we keep our eyes for the planning side.
Okay, thank you. And is that capacity typically measured by level of service and interchange weights as opposed to just sheer numbers of cars?
Usually level of service, because each road, with 2 lanes, depending on what you're done with access, depending on, how much turning movements you have, that sort of thing, every road's a little bit different. So a lot of times you judge it by the level of service. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Debbie before we go to public comment? Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Joy.
Thank you. Gosh, I'm very happy for your presentation. I'm very grateful for the presentation. There are a lot of constituents who have talked about this for many years. So, and Songbird being completed will be a real help too. I wanted to ask about, and I'm not sure I'm remembering correctly, but is this an area where there are homeowners who every year we have assessments that they don't have to pay? And is it due to the arterial fees? Am I correct on that? Isn't there an area right in here that's impacted every year with homeowners who have a different size assessment because of that?
I will need to get back to you on that.
All right,
Usually
thank you.
arterial fee reductions are due to lot size restrictions. So if they're a single family home on a larger lot, they can come in and get a smaller arterial fee because of that.
All right,
But I'll
thank you.
look and get back to you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Rupsis, and then we'll open up for public comment.
Thank you, Mayor. Debbie, one other question. On that north section at Midland Road, I'm not sure if you can get that diagram back up there. One of my pet peeves is where we have these paths right on the road. And you mentioned that we're limited in the right of way there. But things like on Grand where it's right on that road, and if you're using that path, it feels very unsafe when cars are flying by you. Even when they're just coming up to an intersection, they tend to, wait to throw on the brakes at the last second. Is there any kind of barrier that we can put up or, some type of visual indicator to say slow down or give people on those paths some feeling of safety as they're on them? And then specifically on this one, if the one just on the north section, it kind of looks like that path disappears at where the Billings Hotel is. Is that just an artifact of this diagram? Are they going to have to go out in the road to go around that little island there?
No, these are just exhibits at a preliminary level, so it just doesn't show very well on there.
It will go across
Yeah. So if I could answer that question, yes. We have gotten away from curb walks, curb paths, everything in the past 10 years. Our standard is boulevard every time if we can get there. If we can't get there, we go to a wider sidewalk. So we don't put a 5-foot sidewalk against a curb. We always put a 7-foot to give you that shy distance where you feel a little safer. So we try not to do this. We only do it where we absolutely have to. There's kind of a catch-22 because there's a clear zone. If you run off the road, there's not supposed to be anything in the way. So there's something called a clear zone that says we can't put anything immovable in that area, which is counterproductive to kind of what you're bringing up. So you can put things like delineators, plastic delineators through there. We can put things that could move, but we can't put like a Jersey rail or something where somebody would run into that. So we can look at like delineators to make it feel maybe a little bit less like it's right in the road and maybe give drivers that visual impact that there is a walker or a pedestrian or somebody there. So, yeah.
Thank
can
you.
look at that.
It is a little scary to think of the 5 potential conflicts between vehicles and the pathway. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 through there. So some sort of signage to the path users to be cautious and as best you can, it may have to be on private property with cooperation of the property owners, some sort of warning to drivers exiting or entering there. So, okay, thank you very much. We'll open it up for public comment. If anybody would like to comment on item number 2, the improvements to Maloney Lane, please come forward. Anybody would like to comment? No one's coming forward here. No one is online, so we'll close our public comment period on that. Anything else on this item, council, before we move to item number 3, our fire EMS update? Councilmember Gillick?
Sorry, Mayor, just a quick thing. Yeah, Debbie was mentioning the last point there in terms of not being able to put any barriers up, anything that, and this is a point that Chuck Marone brings up, is that there's the kind of manual that civil engineers are instructed to follow. It doesn't really have the interests of people, pedestrians, others on the path so much, or the sidewalks, as it does the driver of a vehicle, or an impaired driver, or a drunken driver, something like that. And so that's one of the points he makes in terms of a needing somewhat of an overhaul in some of our civil engineering standards in this country. So just a point of information.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move then to new item 3, our EMS update. Jason Banfield, I guess, is kicking off, or Chief Valdez, is that the case? We'll turn it over to the men in white in any event.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. As you can see, Pepper's put me up to this so far today, so we'll see if this goes well. Basically, we're just going to be here kind of roundtabling the emergency medical services. And I wanted to start off with just some data points for you guys, so that you can hear kind of what's going on. So since January 1st to March 21st, we've had 2 field deliveries of babies by our fire department. We've intubated 18 patients. We've sent 29 12-lead EKGs to the hospitals, and we've administered 86 medications. And of those, 6 of those were Narcan patients. So we're actually waking up some of our substance abusers and saving lives that way. We've also had 31 cardiac arrests since that time. We've had 13 of those at the hospital with a responsive circulation, basically a pulse, and 3 of those have walked out from the hospital. So the paramedic program that we kicked off years ago is really making a difference. It's basically 9.6% of national averages that are coming out post-cardiac arrest. We're finally meeting that standard in our community, and we're looking to move forward with some of that.
And I apologize, Chief, the statistic you just gave, what time period was that?
That's from January 1st to March 21st, 1/4 of what we're doing.
Just the first 3 months of the year?
First 3 months of the year.
Thank you.
So we're going to talk about a little bit about the Billings EMS history. If anybody was around in the late 80s, early 90s, we had 2 small private ambulances companies. A third one opened up, and then a large conglomerate came in. That was Medtrans. They bought out all the three of those in 1994. And the ordinance was written that you guys are currently operating under at that time. Okay. In 1998, Medtrans was then basically brought in. They purchased Medtrans. That was Laidlaw Corporation. And again, that current ordinance is still in place. We don't have a contractual agreement with AMR right now to serve our community. We are working right now with legal to help bolster what that looks like and to reflect more of the operations we do in our community. One thing I want you guys to keep in mind is EMS is not an essential service in the state of Montana. Okay, it's not required to provide those services. So on that, emergency and non-emergency calls that are received, they basically come into the dispatch center, right? And the dispatchers will then look at PD, fire department, and medical, and push those right vehicles out, recommended based upon the appropriate resources for the call, okay? Per the CPSM report, we have started down that road of priority dispatch. In doing that, we've seen a reduction of about 10 to 15% of our calls. Of that, we know that that's a work in progress. We are seeing some things that are falling through the cracks and some over response. So we're correcting that as we're getting that data. Okay. And some of that's always going to be subjective of the person who gives the call information and the call taker and what they receive. We have a lot of community members that aren't going to give up private information, and so they might not get the correct resource at the time. So we're constantly looking at that and looking at and trying to do that. One of the things I want you guys to keep in mind is everything that we do pre-hospital is very time sensitive, okay? We have an older population that is expanding daily, right? And right now, a couple of things that we really look at are strokes, cardiac trauma, and sepsis. Those are the 4 big markers. And with that, in the CPSM report that was brought to you guys, some of those studies were from the 90s that were quoted in there, and that's what's driven this. So I'll give you an example. There's a community member, a firefighter, that was just transported to the hospital today that received one of these services and is doing much better. And that's because some of the teamwork we do with AMR in the field. So time is everything when you're talking strokes and cardiac and things like that. So a little bit of investment on the front end is big on the back end. Okay, all right, so now when you look at this slide, we want to talk about the governing bodies. When you look in the state of Montana, we have incorporated cities, right? Billings, Laurel, even Broadview is considered an incorporated city. But their service areas are a little bit different. And anytime you go outside, and based upon if that's also a county or a rural or a fire service area. For example, if you look up there, the baseline in our state that you have to provide is grass coverage. And that's, for agriculture, make sure that we don't burn a bunch of fields down. That's the only thing that is, that's the bottom. So all these service areas, and you guys will probably get questions on this later on or bring some more up, is they can pick and choose what services they provide. And that's based upon their resources. You look outside of our community, they don't have paramedics, they don't have the ability to take care of hazmat, they don't have those things that are required by us with the authority having jurisdiction. Okay, so the other pressure that's coming in at us are communities that are outside Billings, and less than 50% of those are providing emergency medical services. All right. So the CPSM study also, that was decided that we need to appropriate some better responses, correct? So we started down with the behavioral health unit and the mobile response teams. And I wanted to differentiate because I think there was a little confusion the last time I was at the work session. So the behavioral health unit is going to take care of those patients in crisis and mental disorders and support that and have some diversion away from police, fire, and EMS, and also emergency room placement and to get them help. The mobile response teams are also going to then send the right vehicle. So if somebody has a fracture or something along those lines as a fall patient, for us, that means that we're not sending a big giant red fire truck to that. We're sending an appropriate vehicle with the appropriate level of service on it. So a couple of needs that we're seeing in the behavioral health unit. We're looking at a vehicle right now. We're looking at the mental health worker portion. We do have an outline of a program, and we do have somewhat of a budget. And we're delineating the standards of the medical provider and what that looks like and what their skill level is going to be. And these are important pieces, and we know that we can't quite pull this off as some of that money is going to come in from the safety mill levy, which we won't truly start receiving until July, and then we'll be able to use some of that money in December. Same with the medical response teams, which vehicles we're going to use, and that's a point of contention that we're going to have a little bit of a conversation about and look at some risk coverage. Level of service that we want on there, and that's the basic life support or advanced life support. And then that's, of course, is the education standards, and we do have some of a budget, but the vehicle price is going to impact some of that. All right. So current matters. The ordinance on emergency medical services, it's basically a 2-page document. And it has some generalization, and it's very tough to have some accountability inside that agreement and what that looks like. And we've also changed the parameters with the priority dispatch, okay? So we're not having AMR go code to a fall victim if it's not an ALS need. We're giving that grace of the time commitment in the ordinance so that they can stay more compliant. Then we can go into that a little bit more. Our relationship with AMR is really good right now. There are some occasional issues, obviously, with them meeting the agreed ordinance and the parameters that are set inside there. And due to no contractual agreement, just remember AMR is not obligated to serve our community. And we are working with legal right now to discuss what that looks like. All right, so risk management and mitigation. So for us in the fire department, if we don't have a unit available, it's nice to have a backup. That's what we always believe in. So our transport capability vehicles are super important to us as a risk. So the private ambulance company could vacate our community. They could just leave and take because they don't have a contract. And the reason they could do that is the business is becoming tighter, right? And we have 2 smaller private companies taking the things that are guaranteed pace, and those are what we call interfacility transports. Those are from the hospital somewhere else, a nursing home to a hospital. They're getting those contracts that are consistently paid at a certain rate, where emergency management is not paid well at all. It's typically paid at about 38 cents on the dollar of billed money. So there's a risk to that. There's also for us, is mass casualty. You guys saw a really large potential last year on the bridge, right? We crashed a lot of vehicles. There's always that risk of having something like that. For us, it's also having medical for hazmat standby. That's a state regulation. And then also for us, having somebody there for the safety portion for structural fire and the safety of our members on scene, so we can provide that care to our own members. If we do go down the road of changing that vehicle from a pickup or a 4-wheel drive vehicle to something that can transport, which is, we've been kind of looking down the line of a Ford Frontline vehicle. That's kind of the European-looking ambulance. We do have an ability to do some offset costs for that. We're already doing some contracts with the Mustang Games, and there's a possibility of doing some offset costs and getting some money back in by having them stand by on wildland fires. And that way we're not impacting the business inside the city limits. So that's kind of all I have for the comments or for the slideshow. But if you guys have questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you very much, Chief. Councilmember Owen and Councilmember Tidswell.
I think we discussed this at orientation, but there was a lot, so maybe you could just go through it again. If there's a need for transport capacity, why would you not have the medical response vehicles have transport capacity?
Well, and that's all based upon, can our community members support that? And we're seeing, as a paramedic, as a profession in EMS, we're starting to see less people go into medicine, right? That's just a national thing. Now, for us, it is a good reason to have that. It's just that next piece of safety net for our community. If they're unavailable to do that, then we should be able to take care of that patient. Because back to the whole time is health. Those are critical times when we're looking at those patients.
Sorry, can I follow up?
Go ahead.
I don't think I must not have said my question clearly. It's my understanding that the medical response team vehicles, MRVs, MRTs, whatever you're calling them, will not have transport capacity.
Correct.
Why? If we need backup transport capacity, why not just have those vehicles have transport capacity?
Yeah, and that's what we're having those discussions. And
Oh, I see. You haven't determined.
we haven't determined that based upon our risk.
Because right now, Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, but the city of Billings, largest city in the state of Montana, doesn't have the ability to transport one person to the hospital, at least according to medical standards, right? Obviously, you can throw somebody in the back of your pickup, but you don't have one ambulance bed.
No, we do not. We don't
Okay.
even have, we used to have something called the safety net in the past, but we no longer have that. So we
Okay.
have we have to rely on a private company for 100% of that transportation.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Tidswell?
So is there a negative to picking up that billable component with transportation?
There is, it's high cost and low volume coming back in, right?
Can we go back to that 38 cents?
38 cents on the dollar. There is some governmental programs coming into play in the future, called the GEMT and the intergovernmental transfer. Those are some big things that are legislatively, coming at us where, it's showing that municipalities can bill at the same rates and receive more money back than private. And that's to support that because they're starting to see across the country that there is that needs to be bolstered and supported in the communities for that transport.
Thank you, Chief. You know, the trick in the transportation business or the trucking business is to have loads going both ways. So I'm thinking, like a big taxi sign on the ambulance or for hospital workers getting them home or, anyway, you can think about that. I will look to Councilmember Boyette, but Chief Valdez, did you want to add something before we go to Councilmember Boyette? I saw you come to the podium.
Yeah, just real quick on as far as reimbursements, that's where the legislation comes into play. That's where the state of Montana has to deem that EMS is an essential service. That's the only way to get that full reimbursement.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Boyette and Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. When I was out campaigning door to door to get people to vote for the safety mill levy, I talked about the mobile response units quite a bit, but I didn't talk about behavior unit, health units. Is this another whole package that you're bringing up, or are you funding this through the police, fire department? It has nothing to do with the safety mill levy, or does it?
Go ahead.
Yes, yeah, it does, absolutely. So that was a piece of the safety mill levy. And I don't know if you remember the work session that we did just last month with the HOT team and with Substance Abuse Connect. That was the whole package. So it's not just the Billings Fire Department or the police department. It's in conjunction with community partners.
Has we, the council, voted on that? Have we? Okay.
But typically, it's been part of the police department presentation downtown, so I think that's.
So are we having, we're going to have two trucks then?
So what we wanted to do tonight was just to make sure that you guys understood that there's a bunch of pieces of this pie. It's because it gets confusing. And so we wanted to make sure that you understood. So if you have any more questions about it, please ask away.
Kevin.
I'll do my best.
Comment and then Councilmember Neese.
Councilmember Boyette, you haven't voted to allocate any money from the public safety levy, but we would anticipate coming to you for part of that 400,000, I think it was, as part of that of saying, hey, would council like to fund what they're talking about from the fire department side, not from the community partner side, but from the fire department side? Would that be a good use of those dollars?
Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Hewlett.
Yeah, Mayor, that was actually along the same lines. This was not voted on, and this was not discussed. In fact, it was actually, well, it was discussed, and it was said, no, the city would not get into funding a truck and vehicle and equipment or personnel for the mental health. If the community members wanted to have that, and we said, yes, if you wanted to be a part of that, you're welcome to join in and provide that service to the community, but we as a city were not funding that. This is completely opposite of what we have talked for the last 2 years and what we campaigned about on the public safety mill levy about this. So I think there's a huge change in what is being presented to us tonight and what we have as a council members in the past had talked about. There was a small amount for a small 2 mills that was mentioned for public health, but that was a yet to be determined, and the council has never discussed that. We've asked for, have a discussion on some of the ideas in the work session of how to spend that 2 mils, but has never come to council before. If this is part of that 2 mils, then I think that needs to be disclosed that, hey, by the way, this is going to be part of the 2 mils that you're spending. But I think this idea of adding in a behavioral health unit now that the city is funding and putting in the fire department budget is, to me, is unacceptable.
This was never intended to be solely on the fire department. This was to discuss another piece of what's going on in the community and to make sure that it was understood that this is not a part of the EMS system and or the MRT program. This is something completely different, again, in conjunction with community partners. That's all.
And Kevin, if I just ask you to clarify, this was the behavioral, the counselor part, and I agree completely with Councilmember Neese. We hadn't pinned down the details, but that was one of the options that was discussed as part of the 400,000, is what you said, or are you saying outside the 400,000?
No, I think what we're trying to say is that, if there's some funding that's needed for some city services, would council want to move down that road of funding it through those 2 mils from the public safety levy? Again, we're partnered with Substance Abuse, Connect, the Continuum of Care. We're partnering with outside agencies for that behavioral piece. But I think it's always been discussed, there's going to be a policeman or a fireman or somebody attached with them that we would have to have there, and that would be the city's contribution. Now, the funding of vehicles, things of that nature, no, we have not brought that to council saying, do you want to use some of this 2 mils?
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I follow up on that, please.
Let's do that, and then Councilmember Tricky.
Yeah, and Kevin.
Oh, okay, and Councilmember Gulick?
And Kevin, I agree there was some discussion there, but it was supposed to come back to council because there was lots of different ideas that people had throughout the Hill community.
Mr. Mayor, point of order.
Councilmember Neese.
We are not talking about the budget yet. None of this stuff
We get it.
happens in
Councilmember
reality
Neese,
until we
you're
get to that.
assuming something that's just not factual. Nobody is approving anything. It just hasn't been approved, which was your point. We got that. Councilmember Gulick and Councilmember Tricky, if you still had anything. Maybe that was your point. Okay. Councilmember Gulick?
I guess, I think when we discussed with the new council member orientation, so some of us had the opportunity to talk about some of this, but so I understand one of the issues, bigger issues, is that we have a lot of people in the county who aren't covered by any emergency services, and there's challenges because there's sort of a moral question of, well, do we, like grandma's had a heart attack or a stroke, and the dispatch is calling through people, not finding anybody, and the question is whether or not we send any resources out because no one else is, but the county, no one in the county is paying for the service. Is that kind of one of the larger issues we're also trying to bring forward and look for solutions on?
Yeah, so as you can tell, this whole thing is very complex, and the more we dig into it, the deeper the problems become. To your point, what Councilmember Gulick is talking about is the pressures that come from the county agencies. What we're starting to see is because essentially outside of, I believe, one other agency, which is Huntley Warden, in Lockwood, in Laurel, no one else has the ability to transport any of their patients in their agencies. And so AMR is getting called upon quite a bit more than what they used to in the past. Our call volume is almost touching 20,000 a year. Now it's an issue where we don't have resources here in the city, and AMR knows that they are solely to be here within the city limits, taking care of the citizens in Billings. Well, they do have a moral and ethical obligation to take care of someone if they can. We've been caught and bit, or they have been bitten several times because of that high call volume. So what we're trying to do now, and actually Derek Yeager in our 911 center is trying to sit down with every single agency in the county and figure out what it is that they can and cannot provide, what services they can and cannot provide. And that's just a start. That's just the beginning right there to figure out who's got what. Because the problem now also beyond EMS is rescue, hazmat, all the other things that the city of Billings can provide. And that's not a mutual aid agreement. We have a mutual aid agreement in place, but that's not mutual. We provide everything that they cannot. And so that's, hopefully I answered your question.
Okay, Councilmember Tricky, were you done, or did you have something else?
Yes, I do.
And then Councilmember Ripsis?
So I just want to set the record straight. We have been talking about both of these things for years. We've had presentations and in workshop meetings a number of times, including very recently. Basically, we asked you guys to go and figure out what would this look like and come back with us a plan. Thank you for taking the time to go out and look for what it's going to look like, and I look forward to seeing that plan, at which time we will vote, not talk about, we will vote on whether or not to do it. Council seems to be confused a number of different times that when we talk about something, we're expecting staff to work on it. No, staff only works on something when we vote on it and tell them to do it. Thank you.
Councilmember Ripsis and Councilmember Prington.
Thank you. Chief, being a state-level politician, can you tell us what the barriers to getting medical assistance passed at the state? Well, why is that? Why are we one of the few states that don't have that?
Well, to correct you on that, we're not one of the few states. There's actually only 11 states in the country that do allow, yes. Yep, no, and it's just something that's catching on. All the states across the country are starting to figure out, oh, why don't we fund EMS? Because that's the third component. Police is funded, fire is funded. Why don't we fund EMS? So it's catching on. We were just hoping to get a start maybe ahead of some other states for once. I think we're actually going down that road. We're going to be starting to talk to some legislators here in the near future. There is a group, some state fire chiefs throughout the state that are trying to put together proposals and lobbying, if you will, to get this done.
Councilmember Prington?
So whenever you were talking about going out into the community, Derek is going out into the community, I suppose the county, seeing what sort of levels of service needs they have. So the county emergency services that Casey has, do they not play into any of these services that? Okay,
The only role that they have is, or they being KC in the DES office, is to coordinate services. So when an agency, for example, Shepherd Fire says, I need these resources, it's KC's responsibility to go out and find those resources for that incident at that time. That's their only responsibility.
Please.
So how many calls would you say AMR misses because they don't have enough vehicles?
It's not so much that they miss them, it's just the late arrivals, if you will. We've been on scene, what would you say, for some of our calls upwards of 45 minutes waiting for an ambulance. Some of those calls have been categorized as advanced life support needs, cardiac, stroke, those types of issues. I would hazard to even venture a guess on how many.
So is that imperative to this conversation of you guys moving forward if you decide out of need that you need to transport?
It is imperative, absolutely, because time is muscle, time is heart, time is health.
Yeah.
And so we're just trying to get a temperature of the room to see how far council would like to go for the community and see what that looks like. What we did do recently, I believe it was yesterday actually, CAD to CAD was implemented. And what that looks like is, so in our community, we have our 911 call center. For our private partner, AMR, their dispatch comes from Spokane. So there's a lag in that response and how they're dispatched. As of yesterday, they were able to go into our system and go CAD to CAD. So now their dispatch is getting the information at the same time that we're getting it. So we're hoping that can help reduce some of the issues.
Go ahead. That's all right. We're still going to get done before our break, aren't we?
So that percentage that you had, came up with, 10% or whatever it was for this response time, is that what you expected with priority dispatch at this level?
Absolutely,
Are you
yes.
pleased with that, or do you feel like it should have been more, or you feel like you're over? So,
At this time, we are pleased with that number. That's what we were shooting for, was about the 10 to 15%. And then also, it should come down even more. Okay, how do I explain? So you should see the big red fire trucks less once the MRT program is instituted. So we're looking at about a 25% reduction overall for the heavy equipment going out on the street.
Chief, can you comment on the cost of having to buy an ambulance? I assume that's more expensive than a heavy-duty truck, and especially by the time you equip it, and that's not something anybody was anticipating, I assume.
You're absolutely right. So time and cost are issues. Nationally, if you started from scratch, you're looking anywhere from 12 months to 18 months before you could get anything new. You're hard pressed to scrounge the country to find used equipment. And you're looking at we've seen anywhere from $250,000 to $350,000 per unit. But what we're looking at some alternatives. What we're hoping for is working with legal is to try to get an agreement with our private partner. Should they leave the community, that we would get first refusal for their equipment, first right of refusal for their equipment. And that would provide a safety net for us.
I appreciate you're seeing the glass half full with that scenario, because I'm not sure that that's a great alternative. Councilmember Joy Shaw-Nice.
And thank you, Mayor and Council. And I'm so glad to hear the very good reports on the advanced life medications and work that you're doing. I supported that because I knew that our firefighters could provide that and save lives in our community. So I am so happy to hear that. And the fact that you're delivering babies now, even better. I mean, that's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful news. Completely happy with that. I just wanted to ask a question about the behavioral health unit. And this is, of course, a discussion at this point. What benefits do you see to having us invest, if that should turn out to be what happens? What benefits do you see to that investment? So, you made presentations about advanced life. I could see the benefits of that right away. So maybe you can kind of delineate, what are those benefits if we made that investment? Thank you.
Well, I've been involved with this since probably about October, November-ish. So, and meeting with Substance Abuse Connect, Kristen, and everyone, Rimrock Foundation, and we're putting this plan together with, Sam Bofto of SO and PD's been there the whole time. So all the community partners, we realize that the impact we have on steering this population in the right direction is better for all of us. We don't want PD having all the interactions with them. We don't want, EMS having that. We don't want them in the ED taking up a bed for somebody who's having a stroke. And there's all these ways that we can hold them accountable, also using some of the crisis centers algorithms to keep people safe where they're at. Obviously, some of those will need to be transported. So what you're looking at is a risk reduction in having that person out in the community, and your decrease in call time for our emergency responders, okay? So what that looks like is if you have someone, I used this example last time when I was out in Spokane for their ride-along. We saw a gal call for services. The behavioral health unit tagged onto the call went to the home, and they acknowledged that the patient was out of some medications, and those have been basically stolen by her son. And so those medications, and what she needed was the decrease of anxiety that she was going to get those medications, and she didn't need to get transported to a hospital for that. So they were able to leave her in home with a safety contract, get her a ride to her medical provider the next day, and police and fire and the ambulance got to clear for the real call coming next. That's where your investment is. You're also going to be, what you also see is, out of curiosity, they're tied medically with the hospital so they can see medical reports. It's part of HIPAA, we're licensed, we can look at that stuff. But we can see how many times she had called before their unit was in place. And the frequency dropped off because she is a frequent caller. And I believe there was 90-some people that we spent approximately $10 million last year on. That's not a good outcome, right? And cost per visit for these same individuals. So if we can steer them away from that, it's a huge cost savings to our community for everybody, police, fire, EMS, and hospitals. So that's where your value is going to come from. As we move forward, are you going to be able to see the data on this? You'll be able to see the data on the frequency of times that we have contact and how that's spread out. That's what we're hoping for. And hopefully we get some people to turn their lives around at the same time.
Thank you. Councilmember Shaw and Neese?
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on the legislative conversation, because I'm thinking that's something I feel like this body could get involved in terms of, we know a lot of state legislators, and really talking about what that needs to look like. So I don't know if you know any of the 11 states that have done this off the top of your head, but if you could send us that information, that would be really helpful. And then my question also is, so if something passes at the state level, is that the tool, hopefully, that would then allow the city and county to come up with an EMS agreement similar to BUFSA, what we already do for fire? I mean, is that really kind of the barrier of approaching the county with some kind of a partnership for EMS? Is that state legislative piece? I see both nodding, so I'm just trying to make sure I fully understand this. Yeah.
So, I mean, right now, it's such a gray area, and it's in its infancy. So we don't really know what this is going to look like. If it's anything like fire and law enforcement, then it would charge each agency or each jurisdiction with providing EMS as a minimum. So that's some of the things that we're looking at. How far they want to take it, I don't know. Every state can do their own. Back in the 80s, it used to be regulated by the federal government, and they decided to let it go and let every state run it. Well, that didn't work out so well across the country. So here we are, trying to get back.
Thanks. I'm particularly hoping one of these states is maybe like Alaska, that's very rural, right? That we can, it's an easier model than like a New York, so thank you.
Ma'am, if you turn off your flash, it's a little distracting. So, okay. Yeah, that's okay.
We won't hold that against
Yeah.
I don't know if I can get a good picture without the flash.
Okay, we'll put up with it. It's not,
Shot and then I'll stop.
okay. Smile. Say cheese. Okay, thank you. Councilmember Bernice, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, you said a couple things I just want to follow up on in one item in the presentation. You mentioned, by the way, it was good to hear that the calls went down 10 to 15%. I mean, that was the hope we were having with the, doing this priority calling or priority dispatch, and I'm glad to see that. And I think you mentioned that you may be able to get that farther down, so without risk to the public. So thank you for working on that. I wonder if you can address the cost reduction. If you're reducing it 10 to 15%, what is that? What in dollars are we seeing a cost reduction on that? And the other thing I want to make sure we set the record straight, you mentioned when AMR came up about handling how long they had to wait, upwards to 45 minutes for calls. that's not the norm, I would assume. And there's a standard they have to meet, and you said you weren't sure, kind of what the average is, but I'm assuming they're meeting that standard. If not, you're having, I think you mentioned you have discussions with them. So I want to make sure the public knows that when they call the ambulance, they don't have to wait 45 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the standard is 8 minutes or less. That's what the ordinance states in there. And they have to meet that at least 90% of the time. What we're trying to address, and they're doing a pretty good job at it for the most part, what we're trying to address is those that do fall through the cracks. And what liability does that have on the city when there is an individual that's in a serious situation and we can't get to them? So I can't remember what was the other part of that, sorry.
If you could put
cost
maybe
reduction.
dollar to the percentages.
So we're still working on that. The crazy thing is I literally just today started working on fuel consumption and what we've been going through. We did see fuel consumption go down, but unfortunately the price of fuel is going up. So you're not going to see it on the bottom line.
Okay, go ahead.
Follow up on that. So if the calls are being reduced 10 to 15%, where are the calls going? Are they being resolved on the phone, or what's happening to that call, and why are we seeing a reduction?
The reduction is happening with the priority dispatch. That's where it starts. So we're able to interrogate better to determine if it's a BLS or basic life support call or an advanced life support call. If it's a basic life support call, what we have done, Chief Rash actually did it a couple years ago during the COVID pandemic, was to give the ordinance an emergency amendment and allow American Medical Response to use basic life support ambulances, because the original ordinance only had ALS. And so they were responsible for sending ALS, period. Well, now they can send BLS rigs, and priority dispatch is helping to enhance that. And so they're picking up those low acuity type calls for us and keeping us in a better state of readiness. That's where you're seeing the reduction.
Okay, so AMR is
just to clarify, it's not that the calls have gone down at all.
Correct.
Like our response has gone down.
The city response is going down, so AMR is picking up that 10 to 15%.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And just to add to that too, Councilman Neese, AMR is then able to send a BLS truck, which then, because it's coded that way, and then we can leave an ALS truck in service. So it does help them too.
And for any new council members, and correct me if I'm wrong, BLS is the lower level of acuity that allows EMTs to respond. An ALS, advanced life support, is the higher acuity, higher severity call that would require a paramedic response? Okay, thank you. There were some other hands before we go to public comment, or are we ready for public comment? Don't see anything else. So, okay, thank you very much. Is there any public comment then on this item, former item 2, new item number 3, the fire EMS update? Any public comment? Nothing is online. So we'll close the public comment period, but back to council. Is there anything else? Obviously, this will be coming back. Anything else from council or from Kevin on this, Kevin?
So just make a couple comments. Tonight's presentation was made to give you some information. Information on, we're getting ready to start setting and up the MRT teams. They're not in place or not set yet. But what's council's flavor for, should we be setting those up for transport vehicles or non-transport vehicles? Because we're going to be at a crossroads here at some point of which direction should we be heading? And I hate to bring this subject back up, but same with the behavioral health unit. Nothing has been set up yet, but we're exploring these ideas. We're kind of getting the direction, that we think we should head for the staff recommendation, but we're looking for council direction of, okay, where should we be looking? What should we be doing with these certain things? And then the third piece of this is just, should we be going away from an ordinance for our EMS services to a contract-based type of service rather than the ordinance? Because if that's the case, then that's what we're going to start going down that road and heading on, working with legal, of working with the contract, seeing if we've got any interested parties out there, quite honestly, to RFP for a contract.
Okay,
So
Kevin,
those are the
I'll
things.
just throw something out for the council, just try to answer your questions, and then council can pick at it. But as for a contract with AMR, I personally don't see any downside, although, except of course, we would be committed. So it depends a little bit what we are promising to do. But I don't like personally, the concept that they could be gone tomorrow without any notice to our community. That makes me nervous.
And just for a point of clarification, it wouldn't be for AMR specifically. We would hope that they would, seek a contract, but we would put that out in an RFP type of fashion.
Understand. Good point. So that's personal thought on that one. As for transportation vehicles, again, it seems like kind of a no-brainer. But the issue, of course, is cost. And how many vehicles are we talking about? If it's one, that's very different from two. Can we find a used one in the short term? That's a whole different deal. And how would we pay for it? If it comes out of that $400,000 at the tune of $250,000 to $350,000 a unit, that pretty well scratches a good portion of a year's budget. And there's a lot of other demands for those dollars.
So, just for another point of clarification, so that 400,000 was kind of set aside for the behavioral health substance, issues, not necessarily for setting up the mobile response team vehicles. So I don't know if council would want to direct and kind of go kind of that different direction with that also, but, and I think initially we're looking at 2 MRT rigs.
Yeah, I'd have some concern. We have not talked about that with Substance Abuse Connect in the past, for example. Okay, lots of hands. Council members, Shaw, Owen, Rupsis, we'll work our way down here.
I just had a process suggestion, which is instead of us going through all 11 of us and answering this, could this be done over email? Is there any reason why we couldn't just get those? You're shaking your head, so maybe not. But I'm wondering, the questions have been asked. I agree with the mayor, but I think we could eat up quite a bit of time. So I'm trying to think through if there's a faster and easier way to get you the information.
And we can certainly do that. While we're here, though, let's just try to comment. We are here, and I think we'll be done before our 7:30, but let's try to make our comments as brief as possible. Councilmember Owen.
So I would throw out 2 just thoughts for discussion, and maybe Kevin, you could respond, or other council members. I would be interested to understand sort of what the likelihood is if we went into a contract for ambulance services, if there would be a expectation of an exclusivity clause in there, and what the sort of advantages or disadvantages are from the city's perspective on that. And then when it comes to the transport, I guess the reason that I sort of pushed on it a little is I'm given to understand that there is a challenge we face in this community, particularly when we're responding to like slip and fall incidents at assisted living or at senior centers where there may be a head injury, that there's a must transport requirement. So if that's the case, then I'm not understanding the value of the medical response team simply to show up and then call an ambulance to transport again. So if there's a way to streamline that, if that really is a significant burden on our services, I'd like to understand that. And I know this is going to sound like a really dumb question, and I'm really sorry for this, but is an ambulance vehicle the only transport option? Are there other alternatives that might allow transport in cases where it may not be quite as critical to have the full sort of ambulance outfitting? So those would be what I would throw out.
Okay. Thanks, Councilmember Owen. I'll try to answer a couple of them, and then I'm going to have to lean on the fire department for the rest. I think the likelihood, the exclusivity piece of the contract, I think that's the incentive for a company to be bidding on it, and then for us to negotiate, the first right of refusal on equipment, things of that nature. So I would anticipate that would more than likely be, part of a contract. If we went down that route. I know the chief has looked at multiple contracts throughout the country, and we're trying to come up with best of class of what do those look like. As far as the transport MRTs, I'll lean on either probably Jason, he'd have the best information. We are, they did go out and look at, and they kind of alluded to them, I call them a sprinter van, things of that nature, but the costs are still pretty significant. And then, it could be something, if we'd want to go down that road of, do we want to fully outfit them for transport or not at this point, but have them so they would be transport capable if we had to go down that road?
Yeah, it really is just kind of covering that gap if we can. We can decrease some of that cost. But there are some standards that you have to be able to put a patient in the back, and those are federal standards to be able to transport them for safety reasons, and also the crews that are in. Same as a fire truck, they have to meet certain safety standards. The reason we're looking at those sprinter vans is there's other communities across the state that are using the like the Mercedes-Benz one, don't use that one, but the Ford frontline version of the Mercedes, and it's a lot cheaper, and they're all-wheel drive. And what they're finding out is they actually do better in the snow than a dually ambulance. So for our region, for example, Livingston Fire is using a couple of those right now.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Rupsis. In the third world, I've seen ambulances like Subaru Foresters, but I'm not recommending it. Okay.
Actually, my question was just about that format, so thank you for that. I think there's probably no downside to looking at a contract instead of, I'm sorry, probably no downside to looking at a contract instead of the ordinance. I think that's better for everybody. And then if we can find creative solutions like those hybrid vans or whatever that are less expensive and more flexible than the ambulances, I think that's a good way to go too.
Councilmember Purington and Tidswell.
Thank you. Two questions, I think. In order to have these transports, or where the fire department can transport, do you have to have that legislation in place before you do that? So what is the importance of the legislation?
The importance of the legislation is, again, it's a safety net. So worst case scenario, AMR pulls out of the community and we're left with doing the transport. Where legislation comes in is, we can still get the Medicare billing portions of it, like Chief Banfield said, with the 38 cents on the dollar. But where legislation comes in is if it is now an essential service, we can go after some things such as what's called GEMT, or Ground Emergency Management Transportation, which will completely subsidize that, and you get essentially 100% reimbursement for those emergency type calls. Okay. That's where legislation comes in.
So
Are those state or federal dollars?
Federal dollars, actually.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Purington, something else?
Yeah, so the other question that I had, and I'm glad it came up again, and yes, I'm for looking at the contract route. I think we definitely need to have something a little bit more secure in place. The senior living facilities, I know that it's been discussed in the past, charging some of those for an impact fee or something like that. Do you have the data of how many times the fire department responds to calls, to whether they're assisted living, whether they're full nursing home, skilled care? Do you have that kind of information?
Not offhand, but I know we can get that information.
Well, I'm just thinking that's important too, I think, for the city to realize that those facilities do not, well, we don't recoup any of that money from them. It is a basic service, and it's more of a service to that facility than what you would be going to, say, one residence. So there's got to be something with that recoup. And so I don't know how important that is in this conversation.
So when we are doing the priority dispatch information, as we've only got, 3 months of data coming forward out of that. Once we get a year, we'll be able to make some more of those decisions. But I envision that our mobile response teams would jump on that call, right? Let's not send a giant red fire truck to that. We can send 2 capable people to assess that need and move those patients forward. One is, again, you're getting some subjectivity of that information coming out of those facilities. Sometimes you get there and you think it's an altered mental patient and they're in full sepsis. So there's some decisions that are pretty subjective. And in my head, that would be the mobile response teams. That's where they would go to offset some of that driving force back onto. We need to leave fire trucks and the heavies in their stations where they should be. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Tinswell?
I don't know if you understood. What is the variance? What is the difference between a unit and a transport capable unit? Do we know?
So the original idea of the MRT was to, it's still the fire department responding to an emergency medical call. We're substituting what we're sending. So instead of sending the big rig with the wear and tear and the fuel, we're sending a smaller unit. Still fire department personnel, just a smaller vehicle that's responding to go with the ambulance, able to provide the same type of care that a big fire truck could, provided it's not a rescue or a motor vehicle accident or something of that nature. So that's the original idea. And then what we have found is, since we've been studying this, the issues have just essentially accelerated, and we thought, well, if we're going down this road, we should find out and see what council's feeling is on this. Should we go all in with an ambulance type, still being the MRT program, still the idea, it's just a different vehicle that has more capability for the just in case.
Okay, Councilor Tidswell, and then Councilors Neese, Tricky, and Boyette, and we'll try to wrap up.
So on one hand, I'm hearing a transport gap, and on the other hand, I'm hearing I guess a personnel gap. Is that, or is that both in effect there?
Personnel gap from,
I mean, people are leaving the fire department to go onto one of these units, so we're losing.
no, it's all a part of the fire department. We're just allocating our resources differently is what we're doing. Okay. We're still absorbing the call volume. We're still taking the calls. We're just sending a different vehicle that has the same
personnel.
Medical personnel.
Right,
yes.
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Councilmembers Neese, Tricky, Boyette, and we'll wrap up here.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, I think you mentioned during your presentation that AMRs has some local competition because of the hospitals and organizations are actually doing it. So they're actually there's some competition. They're losing some of the business, and I'm assuming we can't tap into that because they're specialized in what they're transporting. And then, and that kind of leads me down to my recommendation as you're asking, Kevin. I think I got the two. I'm not sure if I remember the third, so you may have to remind me. But as far as the contract goes, I think the contract's going to depend on whether or not I want to see the transport include, or the MRTs include transportation. Because if we include transportation in the MRTs, now we're competing against AMR, and it's going to be worse for them, and they are not going to want to stick around. If we have a contract, then I think we can actually specify that you have to have transportation, you have to do it in a certain time, and we're going to have to pay them and do that. And so I would say, no, then the MRTs do not need the transportation because the contracts are specified that you have to make sure that you are there transporting. So I think it's going to depend on if we go with in my opinion, it would depend if we go with the contract or if we go, with the transport, because I think it's going to be, if we go with the transport in the MRTs, I think we're going to be worse off in the long run because we're going to drive they're going to drive them out of town, and we're not going to have anyone to rely on. And so that's the two. Kevin, what was the third?
I think my third one was the behavioral health unit. Are we going down the right path? I think that was my third one. Are we going down the right path with that of looking, for these outside agencies or community partners partnering with somebody, whether, and right now we're looking at fire department seems to be the best fit. And I think the chief alluded to it. The police are still going to probably respond on some of those, behavioral calls, things like that. But the intent for that would be that this behavioral health unit shows up and then police can clear and get out of there quicker than they are. So that's kind of the other piece. Are we going down the right road for that?
Well, I think my opinion is known as probably not. I think I'd like to have a bigger discussion where we can have a work session, talk more how that's going to actually impact and not only the budget of what you're talking about on the budget you mentioned here, but also the 4 mills and what other programs can be incorporated into that. So I think there's a bigger discussion that we should have and bring up from the community. What are we going to do with those 2 mills? How are we going to use that? And then maybe if that doesn't fill the need for this, then maybe this will help. So I think at this point I wouldn't want to move forward on this until we have that bigger discussion of what we're doing with the 2 mills we raised for this type of purpose.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Tricky and Boyette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that you guys have done a good job. I really think you are headed down the right path. I agree with the mayor on everything that he said. I cannot make a decision about what we should do or how we should do it until we start seeing real data and most importantly, costs. Because frankly, I would want to do all of them. but we're not going to probably be able to afford it. So we're going to have to see what we can afford and then prioritize which of these we can do once we see what's going on there. And we're going to need to see what our community partners are willing to step up with and whatnot. So please continue to plan and look into all of those various different things. And somewhere down the line, we will make a choice about, where we're going to actually get into implementing it. And the other thing I wanted to say is, do continue to go down the route of figuring out how we can recoup as much costs, especially from the high-end users, as Councilmember Purington was pointing out. And I believe, if I understand what you're saying about the legislation correctly, that's actually what we need the legislation for, is the ability to charge other entities for things. Is that right?
So the legislation piece of it is to determine what level of service each agency will provide. And then also, if provided by a municipality, how much money can be recouped. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Boyette?
Thank you, Mayor. One thing we didn't talk about, at some point, will legal step into this and give us their opinion on should we be ambulances or not?
I think that that's a policy decision for this council. And it really, the funding for it is contingent upon the state legislature determining that EMS is an essential service. It's certainly a moral imperative, in my opinion, but you're the policymaker.
Okay, thank you. I said I wanted to be done, folks. And Councilmember Shaw, she's saying, I told you so. But it's still a very important discussion. So let's try to wrap up. Councilmember Gulick, you had your hand up. I recognized you before.
Thank you. Basically, I have a lot of faith in you trying to figure out it's hard for me to make a decision kind of to the point that Councilmember Chiriki was making, but it does sound like the behavioral health team makes a lot of sense. It is bringing diversion. It helps free up resources. It helps reduce our costs. It seems like and you've already been working with a lot of the continuum care. It seems like it's filling a hole in the system, or it plays its part there. It seems like a good thing to moving forward with. On terms of the transport by city, I don't know if is that transport versus a contract? Are those two separate paths to take? Is that a fork in the road, or is that? I guess maybe a question on that.
So if I can go back to the beginning and just make sure we're very clear here, we have no interest in trying to transport, and we do not want to see a business run out of town, because that means people lose jobs, and that's real. We are not trying to do that. All we're trying to accomplish is a safety net for the community. What that looks like, we don't know. If that means going out and purchasing our own vehicles to make sure that we have that covered, great. If that means we put something in a service agreement within the ordinance that says, you'll leave us your equipment, which they have done in other communities, by the way. That's why I'm seeing the glass half full, I guess. They would leave their equipment should they pull out of the county, and then we would be able to pick up from there. We just need the equipment. We have the personnel.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Purington and Joy, again, try to focus just on those two questions. Are going to a contract or RFP and a small-scale transport option?
You forgot the third question, behavioral health.
Yes.
Okay. So behavioral health, I think, and I'm going to agree with Danny too on this, I think we're a ways from that. There isn't anything solid about that. And even with behavioral health, they may wind up having to transport someone, whether it's to the psych unit, whether it's to the ER, there's still an element of transport even with behavioral health, correct?
Yes.
Short answer, yeah?
Yes.
Okay. So the other one would be, and Roy, I get what you're saying too, and I agree with you. is that if we get this contract in place and it's working, then we don't need the transport immediately, but I also understand your concern of the safety net. So whether or not that safety net is necessary, however, the fire department's taking all these EMTs, so AMR doesn't get a lot of them, right? It's a better job at the fire department.
I mean, that's the way it's trending.
Right, and not just
so-
here in Billings, I'm not saying that.
Right, nationally, that's what it's looking like across the board. Realistically, not to keep blaming COVID, but that really did shut down our pipelines for new medics coming out. People just aren't interested now in going into EMS unless there's good benefits.
Yep.
And then there's a career. And the only two pathways for that is hospital-based or the fire department, unfortunately, So
just one other question, because I don't have the CPSM memorized at all. What is the percentage of medical calls that you guys go out on versus fires were like 5%?
So overall, you're looking at roughly 70% of our call volume. But you can break that down into rescues,
Sure.
car wrecks, those things.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Joy, and then we will be done. Or Councilmember Shaw will come get me.
Thank you. Good thing you called on the council member, that is brief. So I will just go ahead and make it straight down the line. Yes to a contract. Not sure about the transport until more information. And yes to the mill levy going towards the behavioral health. And I know that we have partners, and maybe there hasn't been a full discussion of other options, but I would just like to say our fire department is the best. They deliver exceptional services at great price and great level of service to our community. So I am 100% sure that you guys can do a great job if we go with behavioral health, and I would just encourage that because we deliver great services at a very good value. So thank you.
Thank you. That's a great note to end that discussion on. Kevin, if you didn't get what you need, bring it back, send us an email, something like that. We can carry on the conversation.
Yeah,
But
I think we've got enough that we can keep moving forward, and then we'll bring some more stuff back to you at some point. So,
Okay.
and just one clarification, and Jason, correct me, behavioral health unit, I mean, all the models are looking at a mental health type of provider and a medic type of provider. That's why it seems to be fitting better with the fire department in those models, so.
Yeah, the partnership we have in our community right now with Rimrock and everybody else, everybody's dialing into this. Sheriff's trying to find us a vehicle. Everybody's looking for parts and pieces to get this thing up and running. It's just not gonna be $400,000. So, and I didn't articulate that well enough in the front end of that. I was just trying to separate the two in the discussion. And there's also some ability to recoup some of that money, and we'll have that conversation. But I do invite you, Councilman Neese, Substance Abuse Connect, we are meeting. I'll send you the date because I do want you to see it so you understand where that cost and the community collectiveness is coming from. So I do want you to come to that so you can be a believer.
That's open to everybody.
I was going to say that
sorry.
would be great.
I got to get Councilman Neese on board.
Roy's our representative. Okay. That's good. All righty. So that concludes. So we've already had our public comment period on that one. Thank you. Items of council discussion before we go to public comment on non-agenda items. Any items of council discussion before? Don't see any. So, oh, I'm sorry. Councilor Boyette.
A question for Kevin. I was at the Stillwater the other day when we had a meeting with some architects talking about the design, and I asked him, well, where's the parks? And he says, well, they're not included in this. They plan on eventually going down to the rec center. So I guess my question is to staff, who said that? Did they decide they didn't want to play with the rest of the people and they're choosing not to come? Or can we say, no, you have to come play with us? How does this work?
So Councilmember Boyette, it was an administrative decision to kind of see what the rec center and how it developed, because as far as efficient operations, that seemed to make the most sense without having to add additional staff and you know, having Parks Department personnel at the rec center, at the senior center, and at the Stillwater building. So it was an administrative decision. Since our conversation, what we're doing is having the architects kind of what they call ghost space in the building. So if, you know, if that's a route that we want to change and go towards, we'll be bringing you, which departments, you know, aren't going, I think Councilmember Rupp just asked that, aren't going to be in the Stillwater building, you know, besides Parks Department, if that went, you know, what it would cost to kind of throw that in there under that ghost type of design, and then any pros and cons of what that would look like, so we can bring that forward to you.
Okay. Councilmember Owen, Purington, Nice?
It's just the same, similar question. So after that meeting, at the end of it, we had been promised that we would get to see those schematics by email so we could review them more, and I haven't seen them yet. So I didn't know if you all, I know that some people wanted them before changes were made. I don't care if we get them before or after. I just wanted to find out where they were.
So Councilmember Owen, yes, you will be getting those. I think I have got a meeting tomorrow morning with the designers. I haven't got updated ones, but the intent was, I think, to throw those red lines ones out there. But then after our last meeting with the police and stuff, we did probably have some significant changes just in programming floors and, you know, after the meeting with the police department. So it could look significantly different. You know, the major areas, what you're seeing for council areas, public areas, that hasn't really changed, but just of making things fit a little better and make it more efficient.
Okay, Councilor Purington and Nice?
So Kevin, there was a article in the paper that Commissioner Pittman said he still wants to come to the Stillwater building. So at our last meeting, we said they're not coming. So do you have an update on whether they are or they're not?
So I do not have a crystal ball, but this is how, I mean, I think Commissioner Pittman, you know, is all in favor of staying. Commissioner Osland is not in favor of staying. And I believe that I've got a breakfast meeting tomorrow with Commissioner Jones. And so we'll see. The answer is I don't know. We certainly want to encourage that. If they would like to stay, there's, you know, space there. So, yeah, I don't have any update.
Will that not help our future plans though? Because we'd probably sign a 20-year lease with them or something.
Certainly, any type of leaseholders that we can, you know, get long-term in that space, and I think the county's a great partner. I mean, synergy with services that we provide makes a lot of sense, and I think we've said that from the beginning before, 2 years ago, I think, when we started the conversation on the Stillwater building.
Thank you, Councilor Nice.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to chime in on what Councilmember Boyette brought up is, you know, when we looked at the Stillwater, when Mike Yakowicz made the initiative to go after City Hall, it was because we wanted to bring all the city services under one roof as much as we can. And unless there was a physical restriction, like maybe some of the people down at the water plant or something like that, but we wanted everyone in one place for services that people can come to. And to hear that the Parks Department is now planning to go into a rec center that hasn't even been fully approved yet. It's been on the CIP for a number of years. And the planning staff is planning not to. Then administrative made a decision on that. And the council was, I thought, was clear, and maybe we need to be more clear and make a direction that all departments should be going into, all that can go into the Stillwater. And so I hope that we see that. We want the community to be able to come to one building to see the services, do the service as much as possible, and not have to go, you know, running around the city like they are in a lot of different cases now. We want the employees to be under one. We want it's more efficient to have your management, you know, right there with everyone. So I think it's important that when there's a change in what really was being put forward was that we want this building to be one area where people can come, that it should come to the council prior to those changes. And so I would hope that we see all the departments in the building, again, unless they really can't be there for some physical reason, they have to do their job off-site.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Councilmember Tricky.
Just a quick thought, in thinking about the parks thing, one of the things that occurred to me is that the one thing that absolutely needs to be there is the ability for somebody to walk in and sign up for a parks program, so that can be dealt with. And the other thing is, we can probably just set aside like a small work area, one office and maybe a couple of cubicles and stuff like that, for the people that are floating in and out. If that's, if we end up having a lot of them off-site. I mean, honestly, most of the workers are going to be off-site for parks anyway, and it's probably just maybe 3 or 4 managers that will have to come in and out of the city hall.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move to public comment on non-agenda items. If there is nothing else, Councilmember Neese?
I have a different discussion regarding our work sessions.
Okay.
And I was hoping that we had a really good work session. Retreat is what we did, and I think a lot of the council members felt it was nice. It was much more relaxed. Even this work session, I think it was okay, but I think we could be a little more relaxed, and maybe we could look at doing some off-site work sessions over at the community center or something like that, at the library, more roundtable type work sessions. And I would like to hear what other council members think about that and see if we would like to start seeing different locations, or maybe, we've got these things a little bit closer this way, maybe even closer where we're sitting around a table and having more of discussions about some of the items. I'm actually opening up and spending time on certain topics a little bit more instead of bouncing back and forth from one council member question to another, then back to another council. So I'd like to hear from some of the council members on what they think and what they liked about the retreat and how we can maybe bring it into this work session.
Okay. Councilor Pearson?
And I think that's fine, because we had talked about that, and to discuss certain things, whether it's this fire service or something, because I think there's more to it than just this that they're dealing with. So I wouldn't mind to see that. I guess my question to legal is, we were just talking about it before, with our work sessions, do we have to have minutes?
I believe that is required by the city code. There's a provision specific to having minutes for work sessions as well.
But it doesn't have to be where they're recorded. So if we wind up going someplace and it's not recorded, it can be published that it's a public meeting. And is that what you're getting at too, Roy? Is that you would have it at a different location?
Yeah, it could be a different location. I mean, this is kind of a smaller area to do it, but it would be difficult to get this in more of a, I guess we could squeeze these in a little tighter. We don't have a whole lot of people, so it's not like our backs are going to be to people.
We could sit out there.
We could sit out there if you like. Yeah, so just something to make it a little bit more informal. Maybe even turn off the mics and not go camera. I mean, we didn't do it some of the other work sessions. We've done that before. We haven't had to record it. I don't think it's required to record work sessions.
So
That's
legally,
correct. I mean, the main holdback or things that we've heard was just that Community 7 wouldn't be able to tape it or broadcast it. That's been the big holdup of moving out of this room or the library community room. Correct.
But the minutes are, so that means you're going to have someone come in and record those.
Yeah, and if you remember from before Zoom time, so a couple years ago, I used to have a digital recorder sitting up here. That was the minutes. So
Who's keeping the minutes now?
it's being basically kept by Community 7, but we could have others similar to the retreat where I was recording the session, and those could be, used to create the minutes.
The city code provision, Councilmember Purinton, is 2-604, minutes and written materials. Appropriate minutes shall be kept of all public meetings. So a recording of an off-site work session would probably serve that purpose.
Okay. Not seeing any other comments, so to be continued. Thank you. Is there any public comment on anything that was not on our agenda this evening? If so, please come forward. Would anybody like to comment on anything that was not on our agenda this evening? Don't see any, so that concludes our public comment period, and we are adjourned.
Thank you.